We're back in the mixer, and now we're going to look at some track routing. Down here we have a wire that is routed to the master track, and like I said, everything is generally just routed into the master track, and that's where sound comes out, but we can actually take this in a different direction for some things. If you select a track and you go down to the bottom, find another track that you want to route it into, you can just click to do so, and now you have two routings, or you can right-click on that arrow and route to this track only. You could also sidechain to this track, which is essentially just turning this knob down, and this knob is actually just how much of that signal is flowing from this track into the other track. Reset, it's just at 100%, which, side note, is not the maximum. Most controls can boost up to 125%. But anyway, now this sound is traveling into insert 9. So with that enabled, you can hear it. And without, it is not there because it's actually just turned off. And it's track 9 that is the one that is going into the master track now. And if we solo sim synth, it also solos 9, since that is how it actually works its way into the master track. So why would we want to do this? One thing would be if you want to group some channels together, and we'll just call this an instrument track. I'm just going to put INST, and this is called making a bus if we're going to route tracks together. And I'll also select the boo bass and right click down here, route to this track only, and now both of those are going into the instrument track. So if I have both of them playing, they have to go into there. Which now we have all those signals into the instrument track, and on the instrument track we could run effects if we wanted to do that, or go ahead and route it further into different places and work with it that way. Currently this is just kind of hanging around here. I'm going to select it, and I can either hold Shift and scroll wheel to move it around, or I can hold Alt and use the keyboard arrows to move it, and we'll just put it here. Another thing to note, if we want to select multiple mixer tracks, we can hold Control and Shift, and then we can select several of them or deselect. And again, you can just use Alt and the arrows to move multiple tracks at that point. And I'll arrow over without Alt and hold Alt again to put that instrument track over on the left to do a bit of organization. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and select a few here, shift these over, and I'll make a drum bus as well. I'll select all of these, Control and Shift, and then with that, I'm going to right click down here to route to this track only. And now all of these tracks are routed into the drum track, and you can see that by these little arrows down here with the drum track selected are grayed out because I can't route back into that for our feedback purposes. And it's also an indicator that we are going into this track. So now we have instruments over here and drums over here. For our little buses that we can work with. And to do a little bit of organization, you can see that on the left side we had this separator, which we can close and open if we wanted to do that for the master and current tracks. And why don't we just select these few, right click, and then we can also change the layout of the mixer to have these docked on that left side. And now if we close that, our left dock has those buses as well. And another thing, we can right click and add a separator here for the purpose of just a little bit more separation. You might have also noticed when we had that, there's a left, middle, and right side, which currently there's nothing on the right side, so we can click that separator, nothing's there. But if we wanted to add something in, we just click that right, and then we have a track routed there. You'll note that now we skip track 10 in the mixer since it's routed here, and we could click and move it around the same way we would, and it just doesn't show that track since it's in a separate dock. I'll scroll all the way to the end where there is 125, and with that, I'm going to dock to the right so that I'm not making any confusion with where the track I'm working with is. And for this one, I'm actually going to make a send. And I'll do a reverb send for it, so I'll just get a reverb effect. I'll use reverb 2. I'm going to turn down the dry, so we're just getting the wet reverb sound out of there. And like we did, where we routed to that track only, I'm going to send the kick into this send, in addition to going to its bus. And then we have a track of just that reverb that we can work with. Maybe send a little bit less of it from the drums in there. We could add the snare, and again, maybe a little bit less of that. And whatever sounds we decide we want to go through that reverb, we can just route them into that channel in addition to wherever it's going to go out with its main output, which can be pretty helpful. And one more thing we can do with some of this routing is we could sidechain the kick, for instance. If we right click here, we can sidechain to this track, and that essentially just has the signal going there without any actual volume. So what we can do with that is add in an effect that supports some sidechaining. We will use the Fruity limiter and actually use it as a compressor. Then in the sidechain section, I'll right click to select from the tracks routed to this insert. Choose that kick as our signal. And if I enable the instrument bus and bring down the threshold and everything, you can start to see where the kick is coming in. And then it's using the signal of the kick drum to duck out part of the volume of this bass. And that's a common technique to make room for the low end so things don't interfere with each other. And that's just sidechain compression. You can do it for other things too, but the principle is the same. We're starting to get a few windows here. I'm going to hold Alt and hit F12, and then we're back to just the mixer and channel rack. Hitting a few more controls here. On the right side, we have an EQ for each channel as well. A lot of the time, I would prefer to use a parametric EQ as an effect since there's more bands that we can work with, but this is 3 bands that we can just have as an additional EQ. As far as a bit of customization in terms of this, you can hide the track inspector or where all this effects work happens by clicking there. You can change the look of the mixer. I usually use Compact 2 myself because then I can see a lot of mixer tracks, but wide looks good as well and certainly leaves a bit more room that you can see things. And there are other options in there as well. If you want to go super big, there's a lot of possibilities there. Some of them giving you even more ways to look at things. Like you'll notice on these super large ones, you have a readout of the effects on the bottom as well as on the side. So it's just a matter of how you want to see your information and what you most use compared to what happens to be a part of your workflow, and you can figure that out as you play with it. I'll leave it on the default wide for now. There's also this button where you can look at waveforms instead of a metering output. Which can just be a nice way to visualize in a different manner. And again, those extra controls on the mixer to display, and multi-touch controls if you're using a touch screen. And over in the top left, there is the drop down for a bunch of different options, like your changing color, which we do know that we can just middle click to change color or change icons, names, anything you might have there. And you can get to a lot of those same options just by right clicking on a track, like the file menus right here. And a cool thing when you see this little icon next to something, that means you can click and drag out of there and save that mixer track state onto another one. And now you basically copied that onto another track. Remembering though that your channel is still only routed to 6. This is just a separate one that is routed someplace else, and whatever channels would be going into that mixer track would just get whatever effects or parameters, the different things you might have for panning, anything like that. And I'll just go and make another copy of this, click and drag from the file menu onto another insert, which can be helpful. And you can also just save those settings actually as a preset for the mixer, but that just depends on what you want and how often you're going to be working with them. I'm going to just drag some blank tracks over these ones that I made, since that'll essentially reset them to normal. And really that covers most of the things that we're going to be using most often in the mixer. And there's certainly more that we'll be able to do once we do start recording and routing live sounds that we might be mixing with the programmed sounds, anything like that. But to get a grasp on understanding what the mixer does and how to work our way through clicking and typing into what we are interested in doing, we have a solid look at the mixer here. So we'll definitely be back to see more, but for now we're going to move on into the playlist in the next video, so I will see you then.